Hello and welcome everyone to Titano Virtual Events. This session is Frequently Asked Questions with the Center for Students with Disabilities, presented by Mr. Andrew Silva. This session will be recorded so that you may come back to it later if you need, and so if others who may want to watch today's events will be able to come back and watch it. Thank you. So now, at this time, we ask that you please mute your mics for the best sound experience. Otherwise, the feedback could interfere with the information we'll be sharing with you today. So without further ado, here's Mr. Andrew Silva. Give me just a moment, Mr. Silva, and I'll put up your PowerPoint. Share files. All yours.
There you go. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to present and build on this connectedness between our departments and your department as well. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to give a presentation regarding CSD, which is the Center for Students with Disabilities. And just a heads up, I do apologize for any background noise. We do have a lot of traffic today, which is a good thing because we have a lot of students that are brand new students registering with our department. So my name is Andrew Silva. I work for the Center for Students with Disabilities, and I am the new CSD Recruitment, Transition, and Training Coordinator. What I would like to go over first is a lot of people, when I introduce myself, they're like, well, what does that mean? What is it that you do? Well, one of the best ways to describe what it is I do is I'm involved with transition. I attend Region 19 meetings, so it's a conglomerate of all the local ISD public schools. That's going to be your EPISD, YISD, and SISD. And I think that gives me the best opportunity to talk with transition coordinators, SPEDVAC coordinators, and also diagnosticians. A lot of the students that we have that come into our department, and I want to clarify, it's a good portion, but not all of them. Some of them they either have a 504 or they might be part of special education. So it's always great to communicate with our ISD partners and work together to see how we can have their students transition to EPCC. I'm also involved with outreach. I make sure I try to visit as many of these schools as I can to give enrollment presentations for our department, for the Center for Students with Disabilities. Also, the most important, I think, resource for these students would be also their parents. All these students, their parents are very involved. So I do reach out to parent advocacy groups such as the Autism Society of El Paso, CDIC, the ARC of El Paso. I'm also able to contact local and state agencies, work with special projects that promote our department, the Center for Students with Disabilities. And while we also promote CSD, we're also promoting El Paso Community College. A lot of times, actually coming up in August, we're going to be providing training for staff. One of the most frequent presentations that I do get for staff is regarding disability rights. So I do cover that with staff, the rights of students with disabilities. And this semester I'm expanding the faculty development training that I will be providing. The second session will be geared towards specific disabilities, students that are either deaf or hard of hearing, and also students with visual disabilities that are blind. I also do provide training for students, whether it's middle school or high school or even younger, on how to self-advocate. That's going to be the most important skill as students transition into a post-secondary institution that they need to make sure they master. It's very important for them to self-advocate. You're going to hear me say that quite a few times, because without a student self-advocating for themselves, seeking these accommodations, they won't be given those accommodations. And I believe the statistic from Region 19 was that 90% of students that do not seek out their accommodations their first year, they either end up dropping out from college or just failing. So that's not what we want. We want to make sure that students have a well-established idea, a plan, and also their support system. They understand the role that it's very important for students to become independent in order to self-advocate for their accommodations. I'm also involved with data. I always, for our department, we reach out to IR. IR, they play a very critical role with our data, because we also want to mention, I know if you're familiar with Power BI, you've probably seen enrollment, retention, persistence. Our department, we want to measure that as well, but in-house for just our students. So we're able to see how many of our students graduate, the retention, persistence rates, and all of the other information that you'll see from Power BI. So I do have to read this word for word because it's very important. This is our mission statement, and normally I don't read something word for word, but I would like everyone here to understand the role CSD plays. The Center for Students with Disabilities provides students, regardless of disability, if otherwise qualified, an equal opportunity to complete their educational goal through the provision of accommodations based upon their individual disability. Now, highlighted in blue, it's the words otherwise qualified. There could be presentations that go hours long, and they will go into interpretations of what that means, what that definition means for otherwise qualified. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not here to offer legal advice, but what it comes down to is for otherwise qualified, and I make sure that parents, that students, faculty and staff from our end, and also at the high schools, K through and K through 12, they understand when a student transitions to EPCC, they're responsible to meet all the same standards, whether it's academic from the college, an academic standard for a course, or even a class. They all have to meet those same expectations, because in K through 12, students are sometimes provided modifications and accommodations, and in our institution, that does not exist. Modifications do not exist. We only provide accommodations that will provide access to their education. And please, if anyone does have a question at any time, feel free to type in the chat or even raise your hand. So this is how our department, how we define disability, and it's not our definition, this is the ADA definition. A person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities. And let's see, so we have modifications are like alternate assignments. Yes, so let me clarify. A modification, an alternate assignment would be a modification. All students at the college level, they have to do the same work. So if there's an essay that's 10 pages long, they all have to type that same essay. Now in K through 12, they might have provided that student a modification where maybe they had to do half the work, or maybe an alternate assignment. That's a great question. Now I'm curious on if, I guess, the level of understanding when it comes to what is a major life activity. In the chat, can everyone type in what they think a major life activity is? If they can provide an example for me, I'll give you a few moments to type in what do you consider a major life activity? Seen is good. Yes, seen is good. That is a major life activity. And family dinner. So maybe by that, Ivan, you might mean that a student might need help. Well, a person, an individual might need help eating. That eating is being able to eat and feed yourself. That is a major life activity. Walking, yes, that is correct. The mobility of being able to walk, that is a major life activity. Sleeping as well, that is true. Walking, those are all great examples. And if you look onto the ADA website, you won't find that they list these, and yes, being able to bathe. They won't list these because it's ongoing, and they can continue to update and add. So they won't list the major life activities, and they won't list every disability because it's ongoing. So if a person is limited to a major life activity, that means that they can qualify, more than likely they can qualify for services and accommodations from CSD. The other prong, the second prong, says that they have a record of such impairment. And that's where it comes into play, where maybe a student had a 504 plan in K through 12, or maybe they were classified as special education. They can bring in what they would call their graduation IEP form, and they can look to seek accommodations and services. And the third one is also very important. This is why in the beginning I said not all of our students come from either a 504 plan or special education, and I'll elaborate on that. The third prong is also very important because sometimes a student, they might regard themselves as having such an impairment. And what that means is maybe a student growing up, they felt that they did have a certain type of disability, but they might not have been diagnosed. But growing up the whole time, they really felt that they had that disability. So what they could do is still come and see our counselors, and they can discuss that. And it does happen sometimes, especially with the pandemic. Maybe people felt after coming out of the pandemic, you know what, now I have more anxiety and mental health issues. If that's affecting them, being able to concentrate, which is a major life activity, they can come see, and they'll fill out an intake form, which I'll get into later, and see a CSD counselor to see if they can receive accommodations and services. And it's very important to also remember that we do provide accommodations and services for both permanent and temporary disabilities. Especially, I mentioned the pandemic because we've seen this with hospitals where in the beginning of COVID, elective surgeries were either postponed or just canceled. So coming back, you might have more people now that are having elective surgeries like knee replacements, hip replacements. And if a student has, let's say, a knee replacement, or maybe they had surgery on their arm and they might need a note taker, or maybe they're going to miss classes. And this does happen. Maybe there's a student that has cancer and the treatment is going to require them to miss classes, and the instructor might have a attendance policy, which is common. That can happen. We can provide accommodations for leniency of attendance for that student. Also, I know this does happen at other institutions where students might have to park further distances. Like, let's say, for instance, UTEP, maybe there's a student that has to park where Cardiac Hill is, and maybe the student has an injury, or maybe they underwent a surgery. They can request accommodations for parking, to park closer, to have maybe an on-campus if it's appropriate. And of course, I'll go into more detail. These accommodations are only approved by a CSD counselor. So it's very important for students, if they know they want these accommodations, to contact us as soon as possible. And let's see, I see a message. I saw an article on pregnancy as a temporary disability. Is it considered a temporary disability at IPCC? That's a great question. So being pregnant is not a disability, but if there's a major life activity, like let's say, for instance, a woman who's pregnant has difficulty walking, or maybe they have to go to doctor appointments and they'll have to miss class, then yes, it still falls under the ADA and 504, where we can provide those accommodations, even though it's not a disability, but it's still causing an impairment on major life activities. Great question. Great question. So in K through 12, you have some students where they might be 504 or special education, and it's the school's responsibility for elementary schools, middle schools, and public schools to make sure that they provide both accommodations and modifications. It's the school's responsibility. And also they do guarantee success by providing those modifications for those students. Now, when it comes to secondary education, we know that that does not happen, but these are the two main laws that protect students with disabilities. You have the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. This is Title II in the ADA, and if you look up the ADA website, you will see it broken down by different titles. The other titles don't pertain to education. It's strictly Title II for us. And we also have 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And when it comes down to it, these laws, what they provide is access. They provide access to education. That's the bottom line when it comes to our department. We're here to make sure that students have access to their education. Now, post-secondary institution laws continued. Well, our offices are technically, even though I say CSD, you might hear me say DSO, and DSO stands for Disability Service Office. A DSO, they exist in all post-secondary educational institutions. So at UTEP, the DSO there, it's called CAS. NMSU has one. UT has one. And what I do have to remind students sometimes and parents at the high school level is when, actually I was at Burgess and one student asked me, how much does it cost for your services? Well, who can tell me in the chat, what do they think? How much do these accommodations and services cost to the student? Good, yes, yeah, good, yeah. Yeah, none of them are charged. They are absolutely free. So when I hear students ask that question, I always smile and I tell them, you know what, it's all free. You're a student, you paid your tuition, it's free. And I remind them though now that these laws, when they transition, they create a responsibility, a shift in responsibility for them. They have to be more independent. They have to self-advocate and seek out these accommodations. When I also meet with schools, especially at the high school level, I also let them know that our services are extended not just to students that are here at EPCC or maybe taking online classes, but they're extended to students that are in dual credit, students that are part of the early college. They will receive these accommodations if they seek them out. So here are the rights of the student. I'm just briefly going to go over them. Equal access, that's the main one. So students have equal access when it comes to financial aid. Student activities, so if a student wants to join a club and they might need a sign language interpreter, we will provide that sign language interpreter, whether it's during office hours or extended hours. One thing that I did remove because it doesn't apply to us only because we do not provide housing. Well, it's housing. So institutions like UTEP that have dorms, they do have to provide equal access for housing. We also provide reasonable accommodations. So students, a lot of times they're familiar with the accommodations they received in high school. They can request those accommodations, but it doesn't mean it's going to be granted. The person who gets the final approval is the CSD counselor. That's why it's very important for students when they come into CSD that they're prepared to talk about these two topics. They need to talk about their disability and how it affects them in the classroom. Those two things are very important. And I always tell the students and parents, if there are ARD meetings that are taking place, it's best that the student is able to attend those ARD meetings. So that way they're really aware of what their disability is and how it affects them in the class. Those discussions can help give the student the most appropriate and the best accommodations for them while they're here at EPCC. Now, sometimes an accommodation, it might not seem reasonable to an individual who's not familiar with disabilities. Let's say, for instance, I'm a math instructor and I see a student that has extra time on an exam and they're allowed to use notes, and I might think, hey, that's an unfair advantage, but it's not. For the student to have those notes and that extra time, that's something that was approved by a counselor, and it's not giving the student an advantage. It's just making sure that the student has access. And for all the accommodations, it's very important that we follow them with fidelity. We have to follow them 100%. If there's any questions on how to follow an accommodation, please contact our department and we can go through how to follow those accommodations. And when it comes to reasonable accommodations, the way ADA sometimes describes reasonable accommodations is the negation or the complement. They describe, well, what is not a reasonable accommodation if it poses a direct threat or health to the safety of others. So let's say, for instance, I'm running a chemistry lab, and let's say, for instance, we're at capacity. We're at capacity, and then there's a sign language interpreter that comes in. That adds problems, that can create problems to the environment, especially at a chemistry lab where they're dealing with chemicals, and safety is an issue. It needs to be prioritized. So then they have to have discussions if maybe they can move it to a bigger class, or maybe there's other times that are optional for this, but something does need to be done, because having that extra person in there, it does pose a threat to others, and that would not be reasonable. Also, if it means a substantial change to how the curriculum is done. For instance, if a student, let's say the nursing program, if let's say there's clinicals where the students have to go in person to the hospital, and the student requests to have that class online when it's an in-person class, that's not a reasonable accommodation, because I'm pretty sure part of that clinical is being able to experience that environment, the stress, that environment that nurses go to, because they have a very hard job. And that environment is very critical to the curriculum. And also at the bottom it says if it creates an undue administrative or financial burden. And that I don't think that holds up in court from everything I've seen. I don't think I've seen an institution be able to say that they couldn't provide these services because it was too expensive. Usually what happens in that case, and I'll give you an example. In the past, maybe there was a student that requested a CART service, and CART is where there's an individual that actually transcribes the class, and it's expensive. So an alternative, which we can provide alternatives, would be to have a scribe or a note taker and a sign language interpreter. And that's a lot more affordable than having a person that is a cart, where they type out word for word what is being said. Also, this was brought to my attention earlier in the presentation, and it's been brought up to my attention actually by faculty. Sometimes there might be concerns regarding students having seizures in class. Maybe a student has epilepsy, and I'm glad this was brought up, because the theme of all this is communication. Communication it's the most important, to have a proactive approach rather than being ad hoc. So with students with epilepsy, the concern was that the instructor didn't know till a seizure happened that that student was susceptible to have seizures, and if there was anything we can do going forward. And the answer was um, the student might disclose, and we're not encouraging students to disclose their disabilities because it's confidential, but sometimes the student might disclose to you that they have a epilepsy, and seizures might be frequent in the class. And in that case, a student, well, they let the instructor know their disability, but our department, we cannot ahead of time let an instructor or let a department know that this student has this disability and please expect this. We can't do that due to confidentiality. And that's the only response that I could provide, because yes, all of the students confidentiality when it comes to a disability, it is confidential. Now, this also has come up in past presentations. Sometimes we'll have instructors where they have questions regarding a student, and depending on the discussions that we have with the instructor, we can only disclose if that student is receiving CSD services. We cannot disclose the disability, but depending on the inquiry. For instance, if an instructor notices that a student is not paying attention in class, but it's getting worse. Maybe the behavior of the student might be getting worse. Maybe they noticed some unhealthy behavior with the student, or some very deep concerns. They can inquire if the student is receiving services, and then our CSD counselors would decide and determine if it's appropriate to respond to that. So that's why communication, I always say, it's very critical with our department and the institution as a whole. This is what I always emphasize when I meet with high school students on what makes college different, what I highlighted in blue. Everything else, it's pretty obvious to all of us, but all students have to self-advocate. And when I say self-advocate, it also applies to all students in general. When students need help, if they don't understand something from the instructor, they need to clarify, they need to self-advocate. But it's very important for our students because that's the only way they're going to get their accommodations. Also, a lot of our students, sometimes their parents like to get involved, and from K through 12, their parents, their guardians, they might have been the voice of the student. And unfortunately, when it comes to college, that's not the case. We do not discuss how a student is doing. And so this could apply to instructors as well, because maybe you might have a parent email you. You might have a parent show up to an office hour and try to discuss things relating to the student. We should not be talking to the parents. And also, every student does the same assigned work. That's very important. We make sure that they really understand that. Okay, so in order for students to receive these accommodations, the first thing is they have to fill out an intake from our department. Now, our intake form, it's a page and a half long. They can request that via email, or actually walk in on campus in person, fill it out, and then they can schedule their meeting with the CSD counselor. And when they meet with the CSD counselor, we encourage them to bring documentation. Now, I'll go a little more into documentation. Documentation is not, it is required, but if a student does not have documentation, they should still come and see us, because we can obtain that documentation later on the semester. So we still encourage students, don't let documentation be a deterrent. We can guide you on how to get that documentation. Now, if a student has a disability, but we need more documentation than what they have, the student is responsible to get that medical documentation. So that means if there's a cost, maybe the student has to go to a therapist, a psychiatrist, or maybe like an audiologist, then yes, that cost will fall onto the student. Let's see, it says, if a student has an obvious physical disability, do they still need documentation? Yes, good question. Yes, any documentation is needed. We're very lenient though. We're very lenient at the college. When some institutions, they require certain documentation day one. And as long as we get it throughout the semester, we will be fine. And depending on what the disability is, sometimes if it's let's say a student who's deaf or hard of hearing, and if we had an audiologist report or an audiogram report, and it wouldn't matter the year, as long as we had that on file, that would be good enough. For other disabilities, we try to keep things in line within the current 3-year mark. But some institutional, they will require immediate documentation, and we're more lenient, which is great for our students, because we want to make sure that they have their class schedule and their accommodations. And when it comes to the high school level, I always remind administrators and also Region 19, when it comes to the TSI, the high school students can receive those accommodations, because when they're a college student and they're going to take the TSI, they can get accommodations for the TSI exam. So if they can get it when they're a college student, they can also get those accommodations at the high school level. And those are the steps that I did discuss on how to register with CSD. And here are the differences with accommodations versus modifications. And let's see, it says, I had a student and parent not happy with the amount of weekly hours y'all were providing them this past semester. Is this a thing that a certain disability receives a different amount of hours? Ooh, okay, good question, Ivan. Now, what for providing, was it a particular service? Because I'm thinking based on the hour remark, it might be tutoring. Is it tutoring? Okay, okay. So I'm glad this got brought up. And I was going to cover it in a little bit, but so for tutoring, just to be clear with everyone, tutoring is a service. It is not an accommodation. The one factor I think that separates our DSO office versus other DSO offices would be tutoring. Tutoring is not an accommodation, so the institution does not have to provide tutoring. We do not have to provide tutoring. We do though, but that's a good question. Traditionally, we provide students 3 hours of tutoring. Once in a while, we might provide more hours of tutoring to a student, but the students can always request more tutoring. The person who gives the final approval would be a CSD counselor, and that's only if it's appropriate. So a lot of times we might have students that say, you know what, I think I need more math tutoring or more English tutoring. It's not granted to every student, and it I don't want to say it's based on the disability. It's because the disability doesn't define the student. It's based on the student, on the needs of the student. That's a great question, Ivan. And it's always important to remind students that these accommodations, they are not retroactive. So every semester students go through this process of requesting these accommodations. What they don't have to do though is fill out an intake form every semester. They don't have to fill out an intake form, but they do have to still meet with the CSD counselor if they want to continue receiving their accommodations. Yes, and that's, I'm glad there's concerns with hours. So if students request more hours of tutoring, we've built this great connectedness with SSSP and student success, so that way we can filter students to other tutoring departments. Because 3 hours, you know, a student might be taking, let's say, a calculus class, and I got my degree in mathematics, and I know 3 hours a week might not be enough to study. So I'm glad that Patricia was able to put the link for tutoring from Student Success. And yes, we will try to make sure that all of our students are aware of these other places that they can receive tutoring from. So when it comes to confidentiality, it's very important that we make sure a student's disability is kept confidential. It's also good to never assume that a student has or does not have a disability. And at the same time, it's also good to never assume that a student is or isn't enrolled with CSD, because sometimes I know they might see a student with a physical disability, let's say for instance a student in a wheelchair, and people might assume that that student is with CSD, and that's far from the truth. Because remember, it's a student's option to receive these services from CSD. Some students might be very independent, where we may never see them, and they might have a physical disability, and we've never seen them in our offices, and that's great. That's fine. We're here to just make sure that if students do need those accommodations, that we're here to provide them. So these are some of the services and accommodations, and I do say some because like disabilities and like major life activities, they are ongoing. Our counselors provide academic advising. We do provide note takers. Now, for those instructors, if we do have an assigned note taker, we will notify you that a note taker is present in your class. So that way you do know that that is not a student, it's a note taker. We do have sign language interpreters. Now, when it comes to sign language interpreters, they do not only interpret the classes. They will accompany students if they need to go to financial aid. if they need to go to admissions, if the student is part of a extracurricular activity, an organization, and let's say, for instance, they're having meetings Saturday morning or maybe Friday at night, we will provide accommodations, the sign language interpreter for that student at those hours, because that is an organization within the campus. We do provide tutoring. Our testing services include extra time on an exam. If a student needs a quiet location, a quiet isolated location for testing, we can provide that. We can also provide a scribe or reader for those exams. A scribe or reader does exactly what it says. They will write or read the exam or the quiz, and that's it. They do not communicate though with the student. So if a student tries to ask them and say, hey, what's the question to number one, they don't do that. they won't communicate that. That does not happen. Aside from that, we also do have assistive technology. Now, I saw earlier that someone did have a message regarding how to make their class more accessible. So I can provide a few hints and guidelines, but when it comes to assistive technology, whether you're an instructor or maybe a tutor or even a student, I encourage you to contact our CSD labs. Contact our we have a technology specialist, Mr. Eric Garcia. I can provide you his contact information if any of you have questions, because sometimes it might be easier, and I'll go into assistive technology a little bit. Can students borrow assistive technology for home use? Great question. So for assistive technology, a student can borrow it on campus. They just have to have either a EPCC ID or a driver's license, and we can check it out to them while they're on campus. They're also more than welcome to use the assistive technology inside of our labs, which are located at every campus except ASC. Unfortunately, they cannot, due to licensing sometimes, most of the time it's due to licensing issues, they cannot use it at their home. Most students, though, if there is some type of assistive technology that they would need, like let's say for everyday use, we make sure that they're aware of an organization called VRS, and they're a part of Texas Workforce, and they can provide them that technology to use 24/7. So if a student needs a screen reader like JAWS, they can use that. Now, also when it comes to assistive technology, this is what I tell students when I go to the high school. If a student struggles with hearing, if a student struggles with seeing, if a student struggles even with technology, or even reading, that's probably the most important one. If they struggle with any of those could be clear indications that some assistive technology could help them. And I'll repeat it again, that we probably do have some assistive technology that can benefit them. For instance, and this is sometimes some instructors have brought in this inquiry, and it's actually helped us with students. We do have the capabilities, and it's Mr. Eric Garcia, of obtaining digital textbooks, because maybe a student has trouble reading, maybe they have dyslexia, maybe they have a disability, maybe the student's blind. We can obtain electronic textbooks. Now, we remind students, though, the only way that this can happen is when, so this would be great for instructors to mention on the syllabus. If they hold onto the receipt of the book that they purchased, and the book has to unfortunately be purchased at the EPCC bookstore. So if a student purchases a book at the EPCC bookstore and they have the receipt, they can come to our offices and request an electronic format of that book. And the reason why it's great is because, well, it's a digital file, and there are many apps, many immersive readers out there that can actually read the textbook. So it's almost like an audio book, and it makes it easier for the students. So that's always great to let students know day one when it comes to assistive technology. There's so much out there that can really help benefit these students. And if we have time, I'll show one more thing, because I noticed that a lot of departments make flyers, or they might print certain materials that are in PDF formats, and I can show you how to check to make sure that they are accessible. So for students, the best time to contact CSD is before the semester starts in a timely manner. Now, again, remember, students have the right on seeing us when they choose. But if they want their accommodations day one, if they know that they're going to want these accommodations day one, they need to contact us before the first day of school, because when August comes, I know our counselors are booked. They get booked with students registering last minute, so avoid that that last minute registration. See our counselors as soon as possible, because it does take time seeing a CSD counselor. And this is our NSO that we're going to have, just to let anyone out there know. And I'm so glad that we can invite Student Success to this CSD NSO. It will be July 27th. We're estimating from around 1 to 4:30. It's going to be at the ASC campus, Building A, the auditorium at 9050 Viscount, which is right next to the Fountains of Farah. It's important for students to make sure that they register, because we do have limited seating, but I'd like to share the great news. Right now we have 77 students, and including their guardians and parents, we have 169 students and parents attending this new student orientation for our department, for the Center for Students with Disabilities. So we're really looking forward to a great turnout, and the goal of this is making sure that all of the students starting in the fall, that they have their accommodations, and they take advantage of all of the services here at El Paso Community College. And here's all of our contact information. So remember, if for any instructors out there, if they have any questions, concerns, please feel free to contact our offices. That's the most important part of this presentation. It's the outreach to faculty, to our departments, making sure that they can easily contact us. And like I said, one thing that I will go over, because I've noticed a lot more of like flyers being sent out to the college, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to make sure that they are accessible for students with visual disabilities. So I'm just going to go here, and let me see if I can screen share. Would that be okay if I screen share?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to go here, and let me go to share screen and application, and let me know when you can see the computer, my desktop.
Yes, sir. We see your desktop.
Okay, so one thing I have is a PDF that, let's say, I created on Canva. A lot of people love to use Canva, huh? And with this PDF, it says, join us for a new student orientation, and it has all of the information here. Now, when we create these PDFs on Canva, we're allowed to manipulate the document how we see fit. We can move the title from here all the way to the top, and we can rearrange objects. But when we save it as a PDF and we're ready to distribute it, we might not be aware, but the accessibility might be changed. So this is great, because all faculty, staff, everyone here on campus, when we open up a PDF file, we have Adobe Acrobat Pro. And let me just show you something though real quick. Now this is how I know if it's accessible or not. I can open with, and let's see, if I go here and open the document with Microsoft Edge, I don't use Edge at all, but I always use it to verify if something is accessible. I'll open Edge, and on Edge, once you open the document, the PDF on Edge, if you go here to the three dots on the top right corner, you can go to read aloud. And what it's going to do, before I click on it, I'm not sure if you'll hear audio playback because of the format, but what you will see are the highlighted sections. So when I click read aloud, you'll see that it's reading this area here instead of the top. And now it jumped up to this section here, and now it jumps down to the bottom. So do you all see how the reading order was disorientated. It didn't read from the top to the bottom. So it can be very confusing, especially for a student that does have, let's say for instance, a student that might have low vision or might be blind. So what you can do is if you create a document or you create some materials for your class, you can always check on that program. And if I go here, back to my original document, in Adobe Acrobat Pro, there's an icon here, accessibility. You can click on it and you're gonna see all these options open up. And the way that you can fix this is by going to the reading order. And now you notice that there's numbers near each box, near each text, whether it's an image. And if you go to show order of the panel, this tells you now that, hey, figure this EPCC logo, this is the number 2 thing it's going to read. This new student, let me scroll down a little bit. This new student orientation text box, it's the number 4 thing. And notice how where it says join us for A, that's the 6th thing it's going to read. And you can change that easily just by clicking on the left side, holding it down, and dragging it to the place that you need it. So let's say, for instance, I want the EPCC logo, which is number 2. If I want that to be number 1, I can drag that, or bring this down, and it changes the order. So number 6, if I want that to be number 2, I just drag that all the way up here, right underneath the 1, and now it becomes the 2nd thing. So that's very important on how to change the order. Let me go, because I think I saw a question. Let me go back to the chat. There we go. Let's see. Yes. And that's one way how you can easily make a document more accessible. And I'd like to show one more. Let me go back to screen sharing. I'm just going to read some of the comments. This info is great. No, thank you. And if I go here, let me screen share again. So I'm going to go to Word. Something that's very important on Word would be, let me go here to share files. And okay, so let me know when you can see the desktop again. There we go. Everyone see the,
yes, sir.
There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also show you with pictures. It's very important with pictures that we add an alt text. And the way that you add the alt text on Word, it's also the same way that you can add it on PowerPoint. So when you have a PowerPoint presentation lecture for your class, all you would have to do is on an image, you can right click and you would go to Format Picture, and these options on the right open up, and you will see right here on Layout and Properties, Alt Text. Now for alt text, you can title it like Pepsi logo. You can title it like, let's say, Pepsi logo. Now what's important is the description. Depending on the appropriateness, you can be as detail orientated as you want. If it's just the logo, like maybe an EPCC logo or a Pepsi logo, you can put Pepsi logo, that's fine. But let's say, for instance, it's a medical image, then you might want to be a little more detailed if it's a medical image for like a biology or an anatomy class, that it might be more appropriate to give maybe a longer sentence, but never like a paragraph. We also have to keep in mind for it not to be too long, for it to be very specific and appropriate to what those needs are. Now, what I would also like to show is right here, when it comes to Word, if I go here to my EPCC, we do have the apps, and I encourage students to always use their apps because it has the most up-to-date format for Word. So if I was to go to Word, and let's say I go to a blank document, and let's say, for instance, that I have a visual disability, and or maybe I might have dyslexia, and I need a screen reader. I need an immersive screen reader. So let me just, I'm just gonna type, I'll put like hello world. And you can have your files here. And what a student can do is, and remember, students have this for free. It's part of being a student. They have Microsoft Office 365. They can go here to Immersive Reader. And when they go to Immersive Reader, they have options here on the side. So it can, if they click play, it's just going to read and it will highlight the word that it's reading, but they can go to their text preferences. So maybe they like larger fonts. Maybe they want a different font. We have Calibre, Sitka, Comic Sans, and they can also change the themes. So maybe they want a dark contrast, and that can make the classroom a lot more accessible just by being aware of all the technology that's at their fingertips right here and that's available to them. They can also, so if I go here to the grammar options, this is great, especially for an English class. It can highlight nouns, it can color code adjectives, verbs, and it can also show the labels. So world is a noun, and they can take that off. And they can also go here to reading preferences, where they can focus line by line. Some students that might have ADHD or dyslexia, it might be easier for them to go through single file line by line of a document. And this is just some of the technology we at CSD. There's a ton of programs that we do have, whether they're built in through licensing or that our lab specialist and our lab technician know. And when it comes to any technology, I encourage you to reach out to them because they're always up to date on all the technology that's up there. And I'm always asking them for certain things that come out or maybe even training. So I encourage you to reach out to our our technology specialists and our lab specialists. Did anyone have any other questions? I know that that does conclude my presentation, and just in case if anyone has more questions, I will be here for the remainder of the hour. But I want to thank everyone here for taking the time out of their day to be asking these questions. It means a lot to our department.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Oh, I absolutely loved the accessibility options you shared with us today. And I think our audience really liked it too, so thank you so much. Is there any questions for Mr. Silva? All right, if not, then I would like to share some information with you. First up, I would like to share Tejano passports. If you're not already familiar with Tejano passports, you can go ahead and sign up by going to www.epcc.edu/services/Tejano passport, and it'll give you all the information you need. Right now in the chat for Tejano passports, I have already put today's link. It's good until midnight tonight, and you can collect points each week. These points finally add up, and you get your own free medallion to wear at graduation. Mr. Silva, it looks like they're asking if they could get a copy of your PowerPoint. Would they be able to email you to ask you for it?
Yes, please email me. Let me put my email in the chat. It will be and then silv176@epcc.edu. I'm posting it in the chat. And let me put my phone number just in case if anyone would like to reach out to me. It's 831-2736, and this is my office phone number. And it's synced to my cell phone, so I'm pretty good at answering it. Unfortunately, with the Jabber app, if I'm not within a place of Wi-Fi, it goes straight to voicemail or it goes to the office. But I'm pretty good at contacting you, so email is always the best, and I usually get back to people within a day or two at the most.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Silva. I would like to thank you for being with us today. I'd like to thank the audience for coming today. I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Next week, since many people are going out of town for 4th of July, we are not going to be having a 1 p.m. session, but we will resume on July 8th with bibliotherapy with the EPCC libraries. So it's going to be literature supporting good mental health. We hope that you'll come check it out. I'd also like to share with you the OLA guide for this semester. Each semester when we present the OLA guide, it's updated with the hours of operation. If you'd like to download it, the link is in the chat, or you can go up to the top corner as it's being displayed. There's a box with an arrow. That's a new Blackboard update that allows you to download anything that's on the screen. So the OLA guide has links to all of our services, including the Center of Students with Disabilities at their offices at the different campuses, as well as their hours of operation. And then they also have Student Success Online Tutoring, which is open 7 days a week. They have resources like PrEP, SSSP, Sunday Numbers, which is really popular. They have Friday Night Calculus if you're in calculus tutor, if you need some calculus tutoring. There's even the VV Accounting and Business Lab, which operates exclusively on MS Teams. And there's loads of resources there for you. So please, if you would like to have it, go ahead and check it out. So again, if there's any questions for Mr. Silva, we'll be sticking around for another 5 minutes. But if not, we wish you a very happy weekend.